Muhammad Ali, the boxer, used to call himself the greatest. And he was notable for his bragging and his self-promotion. And once he described himself, I float like a butterfly, I sting like a bee. And so people remember that. Now the story is told him that once when he was on an aeroplane about to take off, the flight attendant said to him, "Sir, will you please fasten your seatbelt?" Muhammad Ali replied, "Superman doesn't need a seatbelt." The flight attendant pointed towards the door and replied, "In that case, Superman doesn't need an airplane to fly." Today's gospel tells us of two of Jesus' disciples who wanted to be supermen, to sit at the right and the left hand of Jesus in the Messianic kingdom, to be the greatest and to be the first. Often we think of God as someone who helps us to get everything we need, the great parent in the sky, Father Christmas, who just is there to respond to whatever I want. And I always have lots of wants. I want this and I want that. And that's often our relationship with God. The responsorial psalm in Psalm 33 says it well. Yes, the Lord's eyes on those who fear him, who hope in his merciful love to rescue their souls from death. So today we've got James and John saying the following to their teacher. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. So they've just rushed up to Jesus and give this demand, this request to him. It's a bit blunt. It's a bit like children making demands. Jesus replies mildly, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they say, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." I suppose it's not a completely unreasonable request, I suppose. It is rather rude. James and John have this vision of a triumphal entrance with Jesus into Jerusalem, and they presume Jesus' enterprise will end in worldly glory, and they want to be up close to him and get a big piece of the pie. Moreover, and this is significant, the demand comes immediately. And I mean, it comes in the very next line of the gospel, after Jesus has predicted the passion. This is what Jesus says. The Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him, spit upon him, scourge him, and put him to death. But after 3 days he will rise. So hearing this, the apostles do what you and I often do. They change the subject. There's nothing in their request about suffering. James and John only ask for glory. And Jesus responds that they too must drink the cup that he will drink. Or in other words, they must undergo suffering. When Jesus was in his agony in the Garden of Gethsemane the day before his crucifixion, he begged God to take the cup of suffering away. He used the term, Abba. This is a familiar form of Father. When he was asking, this is what he said. Abba, Father, all things are possible to you. Take this cup away from me, but not what I will, but what you will. That's Mark 14:36. In another place in Scripture we read, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. That's Hebrews 5:7. Was he heard? Did God hear these agonizing prayers of Jesus and then sit by idly while the passion and his cruel death went right along? These reflections put us directly in front of, well, it's called the terrible question, this most significant question. the question that has plagued humankind since its very beginning. Why does a trustworthy, loving, parental God permit suffering and catastrophe, even when he has heard in detail the prayers of those about to be afflicted? That's the big question. Maybe loss, death, suffering are not the worst thing for us, even though they certainly seem to be. And I think the worst would be the loss of the source and essence of love, the never-ending love of God. When I read that first reading from Isaiah, I quite struggled with it. The passage starts by saying, "It was the will of the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief." The will of the Lord to bruise him. It seems to confirm people's worst fears about God, especially the God that some call the God of the Old Testament. God sounds quite cruel in that phrase. It was the will of the Lord to bruise him. In other words, it's saying that the Lord was pleased to crush him in his infirmity. And so I cringe when I hear this cruel image of God. And this is how I try to deal with it. I say to myself, this is not the God that I worship. The Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, are ancient writings. And we know that God did not dictate the text word for word. They were inspired, but it's not a dictation. The Bible is called the history of salvation because in and through it we discover God offering us salvation and redeeming us continually to lead us to himself. Often the texts reflect our human feelings about God. And when Isaiah says that it was the will of the Lord to crush the servant, I read it as being Isaiah's feelings at the time. And we remember that we are the followers of Jesus, and Jesus taught us about our loving God. And when we read the Christian Scriptures, which is the New Testament, we encounter the God who is love. And with this understanding, we can look at the rest of that first reading. And it says, "When my servant makes himself an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand." Not the easiest to make sense of it. And Isaiah is saying that if the servant gives his life as an offering for sin, he shall see his descendants in a long life, and the will of the Lord shall be accomplished through him. And so as we reflect on these, it seems that suffering may well stretch and widen the human soul, making it large enough to know God, to act on behalf of others, to let in that which is greater than death or life, which is love. And love stays, even when life does not. And then we understand that God's love is parental after all. God is allowing the worst in order to show what the best really is.